and today I'm going to talk on Instagram Live about meal prepping, specifically meal prepping vegetarian meals. Hey Laurie. So today I'll talk about why I started meal prepping, what you need to meal prep, how to meal prep, a little bit about multitasking. I will talk about how to compose a vegetarian dish if you want to just make one up yourself. Protein sources. I'll talk about vinaigrettes and using veggie broth. How to find vegetarian cookbooks and library apps. Some recipes that work well for my household. And then I'll also talk about some of my favorite vegetarian cookbooks. Hey Mary. Alright, well with that, let's go ahead and get started. So I started meal prepping probably a little over a year ago, back when I was pregnant. I think I was like in my third trimester when I started, and I was tired when I got home. And I didn't really have a lot of energy to do a lot of cooking when I got home from work. So I started doing it on the weekends. Hey Celia. So meal prepping was also a great option for us because we were ordering a lot of takeout. It was a lot of pizza, it was a lot of Thai food, and that's not really healthy. It also gets expensive. And we were also just doing it because we had no idea what to eat. So we started making food on the weekends and then putting it in our fridge or freezing it for later, which worked out really well after I gave birth to my son, because he, when he was a month old, we were exhausted. He was still eating every 2 or 3 hours. He still is, actually. But, it helped to kind of, I think at one point I made 20 meals or something, and I put them all in the freezer, and that fed us for weeks. So that was kind of why I did it, and we're still kind of trying to do it on the weekends as just a method of continuing to eat healthy. It kind of helps with grocery shopping intentionally and not doing a lot of kind of spontaneous purchases when you're grocery shopping. We're grocery shopping online, actually. We actually have an event at the library coming up on May 28th about shopping for your groceries and food online. So definitely check that out. It's at lakeforestlibrary.org/events. But back to what I was saying, meal prepping kind of helps you learn about, the cost of things and being intentional when you're grocery shopping. It helps you eat healthier, and ideally would help us eat takeout less, which we do. We still get takeout, obviously, occasionally, but not nearly as often as we were. So in order to meal prep, you'll need some space to cook. Of course, you'll need pots and pans, a clean stove, and space in your oven. You'll need some space in your fridge, and then you'll need space in your freezer and some reusable to-go containers. So let me talk about my process of meal prepping. Yes, Emmy, treat yourself. I usually start by flipping through my cookbooks. I have a bunch of vegetarian cookbooks, which I'll talk about later, which ones I use. I'll also talk about later how to find cookbooks in the library apps. There's actually a whole bunch of cookbooks that are vegetarian in the library's apps. So I start by just looking through the cookbooks, and I pick stuff out. When I'm looking for stuff, I usually look for ingredients we have or just ingredients that sound good. If we're running low on stuff, I keep in mind what does and doesn't freeze well. So I don't really freeze greens ever. And I also keep in mind the different steps that it takes to cook the meal. So I try to pick stuff that has similar steps so that I can do them all at once and have multiple things going on the stove. So that way I can kind of lessen the amount of time that meal prepping takes. So once I have the recipes that I want to pick, I go through them, I write down all the ingredients that I will need, and then I go through my pantry, I cross off anything that we actually have already, and then I make my grocery list which now I grocery shop online, but previously I would go to the store. And then, so once I have my ingredients, I've got my grocery list, I've gone shopping, that's when I come home and I start cooking. So sometimes I kind of have to break it up into 2 different naps. My son's 11 months old now, so, nap in the morning, nap in the afternoon, or if my husband's able to watch him, that's great. So, I generally try to multitask. So let me talk about multitasking for a second. Like I said earlier, you can have multiple things on the stove. So if you're making both rice and quinoa, you're making like something that requires boiling, like pasta, for example, you can have all of that going at the same time on the stove. Meanwhile, if you have vegetables to chop up, you can chop those up. I usually chop them up, put them into individual bowls, and have them in front of me for when I'm cooking on the stove, which is something kind of similar, not exactly to mise en place, which means everything in its place. Just generally means that I try to stay organized in the kitchen and have all the ingredients in front of me when I'm cooking, so that I can easily just take the ingredient from in front of me, put it into the pan at the time it needs to go in the pan, rather than potentially having to turn off the stove or accidentally overcooking something. So once the stove is going, I can be chopping. And then when the food is done, I usually clear off my kitchen table, put all the little hot pads down, and then lay out my to-go containers. So then I'll just, put, rice down or whatever the base of the meal is, and then put the other parts of the meal on top of it. So 2/3 of the containers that I make usually go into the fridge, and then the other 1/3 I put into the freezer. So that's meal prepping. So now we'll talk about composing vegetarian dishes. I know when I was growing up, I ate meat, and my parents ate in the very typical Midwestern fashion, which was kind of meat in the center and then vegetables on the side, and they didn't really combine. And now I kind of cook in the bowl format. So I usually start with a base of like rice or quinoa or polenta, pasta, or if I'm making tacos, like some sort of tortilla or naan. And then on top of that goes your proteins, your sauces, and your vegetables, and when appropriate, cheese. So for breakfast, you can switch out, kind of the grain base with, thanks, Emmy. You can switch out the grain base with yogurt, and you can add like granola and like fruit, or a dash of honey. You can also do steel cut oats. That's a great vegetarian breakfast, or milk and cereal, or if you're busy, sometimes I just have tea and an apple. It happens. So most of the containers I have don't have a divider, so kind of the bowl format just works for the containers that I have. Some of them do have the divider, and then I never really fill the side containers. But whatever works for you, just kind of think about how you're going to compose the dish, and sometimes that might help you decide what containers you actually want when you do your meal prep, when you're storing your food. So on to protein sources. I've actually found recently that tofu and the fake meat varieties are kind of hard to come by. We've been ordering tofu in most of our grocery delivery carts, and then we get refunded because they either can't find it or they're out of it. Sometimes it's both. Same thing with the fake meat options. We try to order it, occasionally, but we found that it's often refunded and they can't find it. So there are other protein sources available for vegetarians. Many fruits and vegetables like asparagus and avocado have small amounts of protein in them. Bread is protein, yogurt is protein, there's rice, and there's also my favorite. That's probably the base of about half my meals, which is quinoa. And quinoa is actually a complete protein. There's not very many complete proteins, but quinoa is one of them. It kind of looks like a seed. You boil it for like 15 minutes, and it's really great. It soaks in any flavor that you give it. And I'll talk about some recipes later. There's also wheat gluten powder that you can make into seitan. Seitan is also available at the grocery stores in a whole bunch of different varieties. Just when you make it, you essentially it's just the powder and water, and you kind of make it into a dough, and then you boil it. and it boils for like an hour, and it takes on whatever flavor of the water that you boil it in. Occasionally I'll use either paneer cheese or jackfruit. Jackfruit isn't actually a protein, but it's sometimes used instead of like a fake meat. You can mix it with barbecue sauce and put it on. It's not a crab, it's a fruit. If you've seen that Capital One commercial with Kevin Hart, there's this big green thing in it that he asks what it is, and it's a jackfruit. So I don't usually get the whole fruit. I get like, a little container of jackfruit rather than breaking down the whole actual jackfruit, because they're absolutely ginormous. But you can put jackfruit on pizza and it's really good, or you can mix it with barbecue sauce and put it on a hamburger bun. That's a pretty great meal to have as well. So I usually create my own vinaigrettes when I cook, rather than going to the grocery store and buying a dressing. So I kind of follow a formula of one part olive oil, 1 part vinegar of choice, and then a sweetener. I often use like a little bit of honey, because when you combine it with the vinegar and olive oil, it kind of helps get the two to stick together. And then salt and pepper and additional seasoning as desired. So sometimes I'll use garlic or red pepper or herbs, depending on the recipe. Or you can mix in some tahini, which is just blended up sesame seeds, or mustard. Tahini goes well with lemon and garlic. Mustard, I found, works well in a red wine vinegar dressing. And I just find it kind of helps save the cost. I mean, some of the oils and vinegars are a little bit expensive, but you use them so much to make other vinaigrettes that over time I found that I think it saves us some money. As to veggie broth, I know the veggie broth in the store, you get like 2 cups and it's like $4. So I've actually been throwing in bouillon cubes. You can get like a little pack of 6 vegetarian bouillon cubes for $1.50 at Jewel. So it kind of adds flavor to any rice or quinoa, or I also throw it in with polenta that you're making. All right, so let's talk about how to find vegetarian cookbooks in the library apps. I'm going to flip the camera around and point at my computer. I'll try to make the page a little bit bigger so that you can see it. Just 1 second. All right, so this is the library website. Just click on the logo to go back home. And then the 2 apps I'm going to talk about are Hoopla and Libby. So if I click on download and stream, I can move down to getting started using the apps. So if you haven't used either Hoopla or Libby before, try this page out. They each have a video. There's kind of information at a glance about what you can find in the apps and how long you get to keep it. And then over here on the left side is information about how to download it step by step and get started with it to create your account. This is what the page for Libby looks like. So this is the Getting Started with Libby tutorial. Some information at a glance about what you get with Libby, and how to get started with Libby over here on the left. And that was just under lakeforestlibrary.org. Hover over download and stream, and then click getting started using the apps. So now I'm at Hoopla and I'm actually already logged in. So I'm just going to do a quick search for just did a quick typing for vegetarian, and under categories and search suggestions, what came up was ebook cooking vegetarian. So if I click on that, there are 408 results. So there's a whole bunch of vegetarian cookbooks in Hoopla. So if you're interested in something specific, you can definitely do a search for it right at the top in that search bar. Or you can just browse through the results. To find vegetarian cookbooks in Libby, Since I'm on my computer, I'm just at the Digital Library of Illinois website. But within the Libby app, you click on Library in the bottom left corner, and then you just click on the magnifying glass to search. So I will search for vegetarian cooking. And I'm going to click on this fourth suggestion, vegetarian cooking. And that gave me 67 results. So on the Libby app, in the center of the screen, you'll see something that says preferences. You can click on availability and change the word everything to available now. Since I'm on the website, I'll just click on available now. And there are currently 26 cookbooks available in Libby to kind of get you started with vegetarian cooking if you don't do it already, or if you're just interested in adding some variety to your dinner. All right. So now I'll talk about some of my favorite cookbooks. I'm going to turn the camera around one more time to point at my little cookbook stack that I've got right here. All right, so here's some of my favorites. So we'll start with this one, Cooking with Quinoa. This is not actually completely vegetarian. It does have a fair number of meat recipes that use quinoa, but it does have a large section of quinoa recipes that are vegetarian, so I use this book pretty frequently. And just a heads note that I will have all of this information in a blog that I wrote while preparing this talk that will go up on the library website tomorrow. So this cookbook is called Mom's Kitchen Vegetarian. I think we bought it at Aldi, but everything is kind of short ingredient lists and only 2 or 3 steps. It's got some nice pictures and some pretty great recipes. So that's Mom's Kitchen Vegetarian. It doesn't have an author, just the publisher, Hinkler. The next one is probably my favorite, but it comes with a trigger warning. It's called Bug Kitchen, and it does have a fair number of swear words, so kind of keep a lookout if you don't really like swear words in your cooking, but it's got a great introduction section and some tips on cooking and building up your pantry if you haven't built up your pantry yet, and what staples are, etc. So I think it's a great introductory cookbook for the young at heart. Next is High Protein Vegetarian Cookbook. This has a lot of really great tasting recipes, and it's also pretty good at coming up with ways to get more protein in your diet, especially if you're vegetarian and you're worried about getting enough protein in your diet. Next, I have Sweet Potato Soul. So this is a lot of vegan Southern classics, like etouffee and some appetizers, white bean sausage and sweet potato skillet home fries, and I think some of this I've tried to make at holidays. And I just think it's a really great book to kind of veganize some American classics. Next, I have The Forest Feast. I kind of consider this book a more upscale kind of cookbook. It's got tons of pictures. It's very pretty to look through. So this is The Forest Feast. Next is The Fresh Vegetarian Slow Cooker, and then there's also a cookbook that I lost, and I'm really sorry about it. I think I returned it to the library, or maybe I let someone borrow it and I've never seen it again. But the other one I'm calling is The Gourmet Vegetarian Slow Cooker by Lynn Alley, and then there's also this one, The Fresh Vegetarian Slow Cooker. Both of these are perfect if you're interested in making something in the morning, or if you just only have half an hour, sometimes I don't have that much time, so I just can throw everything in a slow cooker in a half an hour and let it sit until I'm ready to eat it. And then the last one is if you're vegetarian or vegan and you need something to bring to a holiday party, this is your book. I break this book out pretty much every fall and winter, anytime that there's a holiday, and kind of go through it to pick something to make for myself and my family. All right, so last but not least, I'll talk about some of the meals that I make that I think are pretty easy, that you can make too if you want to. Hopefully they sound good to you. So one that I make pretty often is tabbouleh. It's quinoa, tomato, onion, shallots, which are these little kind of purple onions, cucumber, parsley. It calls for a lot of parsley, like 2 or 3 cups. I usually tone that down to like 1 cup of parsley, just because the parsley flavor can kind of take over. Olive oil, lemon juice, and then black pepper. I usually cook down the onions just a little bit, because again, they can have a strong flavor. The next one is Crock Pot Jambalaya. That is a recipe that I got from that gourmet vegetarian cookbook, gourmet vegetarian slow cooker cookbook, and I made this one several times, and my husband really loves it. It's just white beans, black-eyed peas, 2 cans of diced tomato, chop an onion, chop some celery, Cajun seasoning, and then I usually chop up a vegetarian sausage and throw that in the slow cooker with a cup or 2 of water and a bouillon cube. And then you cook rice separately, and you, yeah, that is. And then you cook the rice separately, so I just have the slow cooker going for about 4 hours, and then I just put all the rice in containers and then put the mixture from the slow cooker on top of it in each of the containers. And again, I put 2/3 of the containers in the fridge, 1/3 in the freezer. Next, so I know that jambalaya is not authentic, but it is pretty excellent. Next is another non-authentic version of a classic dish, which is ratatouille with quinoa. So instead of cooking like the quinoa like in slices, cutting the vegetables into slices and layering them upon each other and putting them in the oven for a while, I chop them up into little cubes. So you need an eggplant, an onion, 2 zucchinis, a red pepper, quinoa, because I use quinoa when I make this, garlic, and then a can of diced tomatoes. And then you just cook the quinoa, which again takes like 15 minutes, cut up all the vegetables, brown them in a pan, mix it all together, and you're done. So it's a pretty easy dish, and it's pretty good too. Next is tacos. This one doesn't even require cooking if you don't want it to. The only thing you really need to cook is your protein source, but if you use canned black beans, you don't even need to cook those. So we usually make tacos with like soft like tortilla shells, which we freeze, and then we just pull them out and put in the microwave for like 10 seconds. We chop a tomato, we chop a bell pepper, and we chop an onion, and then cheese and Tabasco sauce. You just have to take the time to chop the vegetables, but otherwise it might not actually take any cooking. Good to hear, Lori. Next is polenta. This is super easy. You boil water. I usually use a bouillon cube when I make polenta. And then once it's boiling, you turn off the stove, and then you pour in the cornmeal, and you just stir it constantly for 5 minutes. It will kind of boil and pop at you, so you need a pan that's tall. And I also toast chickpeas, and then I'll just kind of put some canned olives on the dish with the chickpeas and the polenta, and then like I make a vinaigrette, usually like red wine vinaigrette, or I had kind of this one, I'm kind of sad I don't have it anymore, but it was like a blueberry kind of vinaigrette, like blueberry balsamic vinaigrette with some like oil and a little lemon, and it was great. If you have leftover greens, so I know sometimes we have kale that we grow in our garden, or we have like spinach or something, and then I also cut up the greens from the other vegetables. So a week ago, I happened to have some radishes, so I cut the radishes and then mixed it with kale, and then I also cut up the radish greens. and celery and put it on a salad with a vinaigrette. As I mentioned earlier, it's just 1 part oil, 1 part vinegar, and then, you know, a sweetener, and then seasoning. So it's pretty easy. And I usually only put my salads in the fridge. I don't freeze them. The last one is potato salad. So you just boil some potatoes in a pan for a little while, and then when they're done, you chop out the potatoes. I mix in some vegan mayo, either green onions or scallions, and a small amount of white cooking wine or white wine vinegar. And my husband really loves it. So that was all I had. Again, I'm going to save this video and I'll send it to the people who do the library's Facebook so that it can be posted on Facebook. I will have that blog up with all this information on the website tomorrow, so definitely check out that. And then don't forget to, if you're interested in learning about grocery delivery options, we have an event on May 28th at 6 p.m. You can register at lakeforestlibrary.org/events. And if you need any help with library apps, or would like help finding those vegetarian cookbooks that I mentioned, you can find in Hoopla or Libby. Librarians are available between 9 and 5 Monday through Saturday to answer your questions via chat, email, and you can call the library and leave a voicemail on the reference phone and we'll get back to you. But anyway, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you later. Bye.